0 seconds. The 1964 Great Alaska Earthquake was a magnitude 9.2, the second largest ever recorded. It ruptured roughly 800 kilometers of the Alaska-Aleutian subduction zone, raised and dropped entire coastlines by meters, and generated a tsunami that killed people as far away as Crescent City, California. This rupture is larger. More than 1,000 kilometers of the megathrust fail together, producing a magnitude 9.4 that will shake for 5 to 7 minutes. Some patches of the fault will slip by tens of meters. The extreme shallow zones approach 40 to 50 meters of movement. The fault breaks now beneath Prince William Sound. 1 second later, the fault tears open. Deep beneath Prince William Sound, the megathrust suddenly slips. The rupture front races outward along the plate boundary, one locked patch after another failing in sequence. The seafloor above the fault begins deforming. Some regions start rising, others begin sinking. Over the next several minutes, individual parts of the fault will move tens of meters. Seismic waves shoot outward toward Anchorage, Kenai, Kodiak, and the surrounding region. An enormous section of Earth's crust is unzipping, and it won't stop for minutes. 10 seconds later. The rupture races beneath south-central Alaska. Strong motion spreads through Prince William Sound and toward the Kenai Peninsula. Offshore, sections of seabed are permanently shifting vertically. Tidal flats rising in some places, shorelines sinking in others. Harbor depths changing, while the earthquake is still in progress. The main tectonic tsunami is already being generated while the fault is still rupturing. In Anchorage, the first hard motion arrives. Lights swing. Elevators emergency stop, transformers flash. People recognize immediately that this is not an ordinary earthquake. The shaking is too long, too deep, too strong. In the mountain valleys above, the first rockfalls begin. 30 seconds later, Anchorage begins coming apart. Violent long-period shaking grips the city. High-rises move through huge, slow arcs. Inside them, ceilings collapse, sprinkler lines rupture, glass falls, partitions tear loose, and heavy furniture crosses rooms. Older and structurally vulnerable buildings begin suffering major failures. Some partially collapse. A smaller number fail completely. But the most destructive process is happening beneath the city. In Turnagain Heights, long cracks race through the ground. The bluff breaks into enormous moving blocks. Homes travel with the earth beneath them, some tilting almost intact, others ripped apart as adjacent ground masses move in different directions. In Government Hill, ground deformation tears through roads and foundations. Across the lowlands, liquefaction and lateral spreading erupt sand and water through streets, shift foundations, move bridge approaches, and tear buried pipelines apart. Anchorage doesn't collapse uniformly. One block may contain standing towers. A few streets away, the neighborhood itself has physically moved. Most people cannot stand. Drivers stop wherever their vehicles remain controllable as the pavement buckles beneath them. People inside buildings shelter wherever they can find a doorframe or interior wall that hasn't started moving yet. 1 minute later. The Chugach and Kenai Mountains begin collapsing. The earthquake is still intensifying. Across the Chugach Mountains and Kenai Peninsula, thousands of slope failures begin almost simultaneously. Entire mountain faces peel away. Rock avalanches roar into valleys. Forests disappear beneath moving debris. Snowfields and ice break loose. Glacier fronts collapse into fjords already heaving from the shaking. The Seward Highway is severed repeatedly. One section buried beneath rock, another displaced by slope movement, another losing its supporting ground entirely. The Alaska Railroad is cut in multiple places by landslides, distorted track, failed embankments, and damaged bridges. In fjords, enormous masses of sediment and rock collapse directly into the water. At Seward, part of the shoreline and the submarine slope in Resurrection Bay begins failing. People in Seward who recognize the exceptional duration of shaking move uphill immediately without waiting for any official message. Waterfront workers have almost no time. 2 minutes later, Seward is destroyed while the earth is still shaking. The submarine slope failure in Resurrection Bay displaces an enormous volume of water. The local tsunami reaches Seward's waterfront while the magnitude 9.4 is still in progress. Docks are demolished. Warehouses and waterfront buildings are torn from foundations or crushed by vessels and debris. The rail yard disappears beneath moving water. Fishing boats and larger vessels break free and slam into one another. Railcars, trucks, and dock fragments become projectiles inside the surge. Fuel tanks rupture, fire spreads across the harbor surface, then another surge drives burning fuel, wrecked vessels, and industrial debris inland together. The part of the shoreline that failed into the bay is simply gone. Within minutes, Lower Seward is no longer a damaged port. It is a debris field of burning fuel, broken ships, twisted rail, crushed buildings, and exposed foundations. People already climbing uphill keep climbing. Those who look back see the waterfront disappearing while nearby structures are still shaking. 5 minutes later, Whittier and Valdez are overwhelmed. In Passage Canal, violent shaking collapses mountain slopes toward the water. A large landslide-generated tsunami surges into Whittier's harbor. The low waterfront is effectively demolished. Docks disappear beneath the surge. Boats are thrown into waterfront structures. Debris-filled water tears through the coastal strip, and fuel spills burn among the wreckage. The Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel is disrupted by rockfall and infrastructure damage. Whittier is isolated. Its only road connection to the outside world is gone. In Port Valdez, rock and sediment crash into the fjord from the destabilized slopes above. Local tsunami waves tear through the port and industrial waterfront. The Valdez Marine Terminal enters emergency shutdown. Oil export operations stop entirely, which means the pipeline feeding roughly 500,000 barrels of Prudhoe Bay crude per day through Valdez has nowhere to send it. Back in Anchorage, additional bluff failures occur. Already damaged structures collapse, and broken gas lines ignite multiple fires across a city where damaged roads and ruptured water mains make firefighting almost impossible. 10 minutes later, Alaska's coastline has permanently moved. The main rupture has ended. South central Alaska continues shaking from seismic waves and early aftershocks, but parts of the landscape are already in permanently different positions. Across sections of Prince William Sound, the Kenai Coast, and the Gulf of Alaska, rocky shoreline has risen by meters. Former tidal areas sit above the water. Other terrain has dropped. Marshes and roads are suddenly closer to sea level. Docks no longer align with the water they were built for. Some boats are stranded above their old harbor level. Elsewhere, previously dry ground is already being invaded by the tide. The tectonic tsunami generated during the rupture is now spreading across the Gulf of Alaska. 15 minutes later, Kodiak and Homer take the main tsunami. After several minutes of violent shaking, the main tectonic wave reaches Kodiak. Water surges violently into St. Paul Harbor. Harbor infrastructure is largely destroyed. Fishing vessels are smashed together or carried ashore. Fuel infrastructure ruptures. Debris-filled currents tear through waterfront streets and rip low structures from foundations. Later waves arrive into a city already damaged by prolonged shaking, liquefaction, utility failure, and permanent ground deformation. Some sections of Kodiak have subsided. Even after the tsunami withdraws, parts of the former shoreline remain more exposed to ordinary tides than before. Homer Spit takes the tsunami with almost no margin. Its narrow, low geometry and permanent subsidence from the earthquake give it nowhere to go. Marinas disappear beneath moving debris. Businesses and waterfront buildings are torn open or swept away. Vehicles and boats are carried across the spit. Some portions stop functioning as continuous dry land. People on the higher ground of Homer watch pieces of the spit disappear under successive waves, then stop watching and start inventorying what they have to survive the coming weeks. 30 minutes later, South Central Alaska is physically cut apart. The picture becomes visible as the strongest shaking finally stops. In Anchorage, huge landslide scars cut through vulnerable neighborhoods. Sections of Turnagain are displaced beyond recognition. Other neighborhoods still contain standing buildings but no functioning roads, water, sewer, gas, or electricity. Multiple urban fires are burning in places firefighters can see but cannot reach because the street between them has collapsed. At the Port of Alaska, sections of waterfront ground have laterally spread toward Cook Inlet. Some older dock structures have failed outright. Normal cargo and fuel operations have stopped. Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport requires emergency inspection for runway deformation while power and access routes are compromised. On the Kenai Peninsula, the Seward Highway and Railroad are broken in numerous places. Communities separated by mountains are effectively isolated. Residents begin neighborhood-level rescue using pry bars, chainsaws, excavators, and snow machines because professional teams cannot reach every damaged district. Helicopter pilots start mapping landslides, calling in grid coordinates for communities that have dropped off radio. 2 hours later, the tsunami reaches Anchorage. In the worst high tide scenario, powerful currents and abnormal water levels reach Anchorage's low coastal and port areas. The city as a whole is not drowned, but the waterfront has already been weakened by liquefaction, lateral spreading, and broken infrastructure. So now water moves through that wreckage. The surge pushes wreckage from damaged docks through port access roads. Fuel that was already leaking from ruptured pipelines spreads across new water surfaces. Newly subsided shoreline floods more easily than it did before the earthquake. In some areas, what was once a meter above the tide line is now at or below it. 4 hours later, Vancouver Island takes a major hit. The wave reaches the exposed Pacific coast of British Columbia. Tofino and Ucluelet take severe damage. Marinas demolished, boats driven ashore, waterfront roads disappearing beneath fast-moving water, light buildings torn from foundations. Inlets and local bathymetry amplify run-up in the worst locations. Wave energy enters the long inlet toward Port Alberni and produces powerful surges deep inside Vancouver Island. Residents on the exposed west coast had hours of warning. Most used it. Some went back to gather more belongings after the first smaller precursor wave and were caught when the main surge arrived. Emergency managers who cleared beachfront areas twice now refuse to open the perimeter, regardless of how long it's been since the last wave. The oscillations in some inlets won't fully settle for another day. 5 hours later, Crescent City takes the hardest mainland U.S. hit. Along the Oregon coast, harbors surge violently and low waterfront districts are damaged before the wave reaches California. Then it reaches Crescent City, a harbor with a well-documented history of tsunami amplification going back to 1964 and 2011. The harbor is largely destroyed. Marinas disintegrate. Boats are carried ashore. Dock sections, timber, and vehicles move through streets. Low waterfront blocks suffer structural destruction. Debris-filled currents tear through commercial areas close to the harbor, stripping storefronts from their foundations and leaving the structural framing exposed. A hardware store owner who moves stock to the second floor during the warning comes down after what he thinks is the last wave and finds the ground floor already gone. 6 hours later, Hawaii faces a destructive tsunami. Sirens have been active for hours. Coastal zones across the islands have evacuated. Hilo's exposed bay receives powerful waves. Low coastal districts flood heavily. Waterfront buildings are torn open or collapse. Harbor infrastructure is heavily damaged. In Honolulu, the skyline remains standing, but Honolulu Harbor and low portions of Waikiki receive destructive flooding and strong currents. Ground floors are gutted. Marina structures break apart. From above, intact hotel towers rise over a waterfront filled with water and wreckage. Hotel security staff who moved guests to upper floors hours ago are now fielding demands from tourists who want to go look at the harbor. They refuse. Waves are still coming. 8 hours later. California's major ports are crippled. Strong currents enter San Francisco Bay through the Golden Gate. The skyline is untouched. Marinas are wrecked, vessels break moorings, piers flood, and debris moves through harbor areas. But the city behind it survives intact. The major Southern California disaster is at the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Powerful currents surge through the port basins. Multiple vessels break moorings and strike docks. Container stacks shift or collapse. Terminal areas flood. Navigation channels fill with wreckage, gantry cranes and loading systems are disabled. Fuel pipelines fail locally and spills spread through terminal areas. Los Angeles itself remains physically untouched. But one of the largest freight gateways in the world has stopped functioning. 12 hours later, the tsunami crosses the Pacific. The wave reaches Kamchatka and the Kuril Islands. Exposed harbors surge. Low port infrastructure floods. Fishing fleets that moved offshore in time are mostly safe. Northern Japan and Hokkaido receive tsunami warnings hours in advance. Coastal communities evacuate along marked routes. Ports and fishing harbors receive abnormal multi-wave surges. Boats and docks are damaged in exposed locations. Back in Alaska, the situation has not stabilized. Harbor currents in Seward, Whittier, Valdez, Kodiak, and Homer are still dangerous. Aftershocks continue rolling through the rupture zone every few minutes. In Anchorage, fires that couldn't be reached for hours have now consumed entire blocks that might have been saved with functioning water pressure. One day later, a major aftershock hits the ruins. A M7 class aftershock strikes somewhere within already devastated south-central Alaska. On an ordinary day, this would be a significant earthquake capable of serious damage. Now it hits cracked mountain slopes, damaged bridges, partially collapsed buildings, temporary shelters, and rescue crews working inside ruins. Fresh rock avalanches descend through the Chugach Mountains. Roads crews had just cleared disappear again. Damaged buildings in Anchorage lose walls or collapse completely. Fresh submarine slope failures generate smaller local waves inside some fjords. Search and rescue teams evacuate unstable structures the moment the shaking starts. Structural engineers working on building assessments abandon their notebooks mid-sentence and move to open ground. Each major aftershock forces the same calculation. Start over on the road you just finished, or move to the next one and leave this section for later. 3 days later, Alaska's supply system begins failing. The Port of Alaska is stopped or severely restricted. Seward's highway, railroad, and port access are broken in multiple places. Valdez oil terminal operations remain shut down. Kodiak and Prince William Sound ports are destroyed or only partially usable. Aircraft are suddenly carrying a huge share of emergency logistics, but they cannot replace the freight capacity of ships, pipelines, and trains. Across Alaska, diesel is rationed. Aviation fuel is prioritized for medevac and resupply. Fresh food disappears first. Pharmacies count remaining critical medicines by days remaining. Generators operate on restricted schedules. Remote communities that suffered little direct damage now face shortages because the transportation system connecting them to the outside world has broken. A village 200 kilometers from Anchorage with no road damage and no casualties is nevertheless running out of insulin because the supply chain that kept it stocked no longer exists. 1 week later, south-central Alaska is still fragmented. In Anchorage, large landslide scars remain open through neighborhoods. Some structures stand beside ground that has moved beyond repair. Burned districts sit among earthquake damage. The Port of Alaska operates well below normal capacity. Seward's lower waterfront is still a field of twisted track, destroyed docks, and burned fuel infrastructure. The highway and railroad remain broken in multiple places. Whittier's access is still constrained by tunnel damage. Valdez's marine terminal isn't close to reopening. In Kodiak, subsided areas are now flooding during ordinary high tides. Parts of Homer Spit are simply gone. M5 and M6 aftershocks continue daily. Fresh rock falls repeatedly close routes. Crews have just reopened. Ferries, fishing vessels, and bush aircraft have become the improvised supply network replacing broken roads and ports. Communities ration medicine and fuel by days remaining, not by normal demand. 1 month later, Alaska has a new coastline. Anchorage still has a skyline, but parts of the city are literally missing or displaced. Huge ground failure scars cut through vulnerable neighborhoods. Some former streets terminate at landslide scarps. The Port of Alaska operates far below normal capacity. Some neighborhoods cannot simply be reconstructed because the ground beneath them is no longer stable. Whittier's harbor and low waterfront are wrecked, large reinforced structures rising over a coastal debris field. Valdez's marine and industrial waterfront remains devastated. Oil infrastructure still under repair and inspection. In Kodiak, some land lowered during the earthquake now floods at ordinary high tides. The old shoreline is no longer the shoreline. Parts of Homer Spit are gone or permanently lowered below usable elevation. The Chugach and Kenai ranges are covered in fresh scars. Entire slopes that existed before the earthquake no longer exist in the same form. Normal transport has not returned. Freight, fuel, and medicine still rely heavily on temporary ports, aircraft, and rerouted shipping. Fisheries, oil exports, and coastal industries have suffered enormous economic losses. After a month, one thing cannot be repaired: the geography. Some Alaskan coastlines rose out of the sea, others sank beneath it. Roads that followed the shore now end in water. The earthquake lasted minutes. Alaska came out of those minutes with a different coastline.